So I've been asked, because you guys like punishment, to actually do two presentations tonight. First one's going to be on the Vagabond, which was Shure's first wireless back in the 50s. A lot of people don't know about that because we didn't sell it to me for long. And then the second presentation after we finish that is about the history of the SM58, which has some surprises in it as well. So let's see if I can share my screen properly. There's the Vagabond. Did it share for you guys? Hang on 1 second. I think I did that wrong. Let's go back here. Let's see here. Slideshow. Is it showing, guys?
We have it.
Great. Cool. So here we are. And if you wouldn't mind, just hold your questions till we finish with this, and then we can discuss whatever you want. So let's start out about the Vagabond, first introduced in 1953. A little bit of history, which is what I do. Most historians consider that this is like the first patent for a practical wireless microphone system, even though it was never made. You can see it's dated 1917. It was a British patent, even though it was invented by an American telegraph engineer, and was the idea of trying to synchronize a recorder and with microphones that are battery operated on the actors. This is really for film, or early film, and recording on steel tape or wire, synchronized with the advance of the camera's film. Again, it was practical, but to our knowledge, actually never manufactured. 1933, this was really interesting product. We only sold this for a year. Shure introduced this radio modulator. And what it did is easy, just little steps on the left there. So you connected the Shure carbon microphone up to the Model 99. This is the Model 99 here. You notice the fancy wood grain, which was painted on with brown paint, by the way. You powered up the 99 from AC or DC, which I thought was interesting, the fact that it could operate off of either. And then you connected the output of the 99, which had an antenna cable, to the antenna inputs on an AM radio set. And the AM radio became a small PA system. In other words, this was a very early Mr. Microphone. The price was $40 and about $770 in today's money. And the reason they had that was in the 30s, when this was around, PA systems were still relatively large, expensive, and this is a way to make a small PA system to maybe address 30, 40 people, do demonstrations and so forth. I had only seen this in the Shure catalog. I'd never seen one live. The archive didn't have it. And one of the things I do is I troll eBay on a regular basis. And about 4 years ago, I see this thing on eBay. And I just can't believe my eyes as it is. And it was a buy it now, and I believe I got it. So we bought it. It was in great condition. We've never fired it up because the capacitors in it are leaky and so forth. But it could be the only one in existence because we didn't make them very long. And it's filled with metal. And so the ones that were out there during World War II were probably melted down for scrap, would be my guess. But that's Shure's earliest wireless or RF product, I should say, from 1933. Here's a guy you probably don't know. His name's Reginald Morse, pretty much credited for making the first practical wireless microphone. He was in the Communication Corps during World War II in Brits, military radio engineer. And when that was ended, he wanted to make ice spectacles or ice shows, which apparently were really big in the UK at the time. They were mute. You couldn't hear him, but he thought it'd be really great if the people on the ice could sing or have dialogue. And so he made a wireless microphone system that worked fairly well. Reviews at the time said that the wireless microphones work with no interference or loss of signal. Probably not true, but it was a really big breakthrough. But his invention was never patented because he was using a frequency band that was set aside for the BBC, and therefore it was officially illegal. 1947 at Shure, Ben Bauer, our genius guy who basically worked for us for 20 years, invented everything from the Unidyne to phonograph cartridges. Amazing guy. We'll talk about him later. Issued this memo. Notice who it's who. It's from Bauer to Hugh Knowles. Hugh Knowles actually worked at Shure 3 or 4 days a week in the 40s as a patent consultant. And this is Bauer's memo, dated 1947, to Hugh saying, we're considering the development of a transmitter to be located on or in the microphone stand, or perhaps integral with the microphone itself. So this is Bauer said, hey, I think we can get rid of the wire between the microphone and the amplifier. But I love this line. There are two things which concern us. One is the patent situation, which you wanted Knowles to look into, and the other is FCC regulations. They're still bugging us even today. But this is the earliest document I found at Shure about, hey, I think a microphone could be made wireless. So here it is, 1947. And 6 years later, we bring out with what's called the Vagabond. I love that name. I'd like to reuse it again. The Shure Vagabond wireless system, introduced in 1953, $700, which is about $7,000 in 2020. And here's the 88T, T for transmitter, and here's the Slim X. The only reason I bring up the Slim X is that the front end of the Slim X was also used as the front end or the transducer for the 88T. And these were Shure's first end-fire microphones you spoke into on the end, rather the side. But the Vagabond is operated at a low frequency of 2 megacycles, or 2 megahertz today, and had a range of about 700 square feet or 65 square meters. So it wasn't really a microphone that could transmit very far, but it was the world's first wireless microphone where the microphone itself, the transducer, and the transmitter were in one piece, one unit. Here's the inaugural catalog appearance of the Vagabond. We were at Huron Street back then, Shure wireless microphone system, $700. And this is all the different components that you got with it. We'll explore that a little bit later. But this is the first catalog, and it wasn't nothing but just a small third of a page. There was not even a whole page dedicated to it, which I find surprising considering how expensive it was. Magazine advertisement for the Vagabond: for the finest performance of your career. I just love that. Obviously a woman, I think she probably was modeled after Rosemary Clooney, who was a big singer at the time. But it's just, it's so 50s. I just love it. And it can be used in nightclubs and theaters and interviews. The Vagabond 88. Look, no cable. The first installation was at Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago. And it was actually at the request of Cardinal Stritch, who was the cardinal at the time. A member of the church had attended the electronics part show in Chicago in May of '53, told Cardinal Stritch about it, and he said, we have to get one. So the first one ever installed went into Holy Name Cathedral. But the first one sold was to the Radio City Club of Rapid City, South Dakota. I guess, I don't know, pretty nice that they had that much money to do it, but they bought the first one probably to experiment with it. And then then after that, Holy Name Cathedral had it. This is a photo of Holy Name Cathedral. And there's Cardinal Stritch. This is just from the Chicago '54 electronics part show 1 year later. And now we've got a musician coming into there. So again, the idea of a remarkable development in sound reproduction. And look, you can be completely wireless or cableless. So here's some of the details of the 88. You got a Vagabond 88 transmitter and case. We have about 5 or 6 of those in the archives. You've got the 88 receiver. It's about the size of a large bread box. We only have one of those. I've never been able to find additional ones. There was a lavalier cord and clip. Imagine hanging that around your neck. I just think that's funny that we called that a lavalier mic. A stand adapter. You basically would just stand it, put this on the top of a stand, and then actually put the bottom of the microphone in that so the microphone would stand vertically. 2 batteries, we'll talk about those later, and then copper wire antenna. For this to work, you literally had to lay the antenna wire down on the ground and kind of stay within that. It wasn't an induction loop, it was the idea of an induction loop. But when you bought a Vagabond 88 wireless system, those are all the parts that you got in the box. Here's a transmitter taken apart. You can see here, I'll show a few things here. There are 2 batteries. Again, we'll talk about that. There's this 30-volt battery and there's this 1.5-volt battery back here. And it had 5 vacuum tubes in it. These are miniature vacuum tubes made by Raytheon. Still can buy them, by the way, new in the box off of eBay. And they were developed originally for walkie-talkies during World War II. So here's your ceramic omnidirectional transducer. The top end here, which has some electronics in it as well, all kind of encased in a resin. And then here's the 2 of the 5 tubes, and then your batteries. There's a little more detail of the Vagabond 88. There was an on-off switch, simply power. There was a gain control, like you would expect from most microphones today. and then a way to trim the antenna, which is up in here, and also trim the oscillator to change the frequency slightly. We have a design patent for the Vagabond 88. Interestingly enough, I've never been able to find a utility patent for this, but there was a design patent. If you're unfamiliar with that, a utility patent covers how a product operates or is used, and the design patent is what it looks like, the appearance of it. So we only had a design patent on this. A guy named Bert Shell, and maybe after this I'll ask Bill Bevan if he remembers him. I think he was an external designer from Shure. But this was a combined microphone and transmitter, and it's thought, again, that this is the first combined system where you have the transmitter and the microphone in one handle. Here's the battery insertion. They went in the bottom. There was a 30-volt battery. This is almost exactly the same dimensions, except longer, as a 9-volt battery, and it came from the hearing aid industry. So there was a terminal up here, terminal down here, 30 volts. And then this ran the circuitry inside there, and this 1.5-volt battery ran the filament of the tubes. And they were hooked up like this, put in the cap at the bottom, and when the batteries are in there, this little button pushed out, and that lets you know that the batteries were inside the microphone. So there's a little physical indication that the microphone was loaded with batteries. By the way, battery life, about 10 to 12 hours. Amazing. Of course, it didn't transmit very far. There's the receiver itself, again, about the size of a bread box. On the front, you have something, that's the Shure logo, on-off switch, a pilot light, and then the tuning eye. And shows you a little bit more. I talked about that. There also were some instructions on the front on some of them. And on the back, there was a AFC, automatic frequency control, that tried to control the drift. Imagine with tubes, the frequency drifted a little bit. 3 different channels to choose from. It says in the instructions, choose whatever channel has the least amount of interference. Here's where your antenna hooked up, a squelch control, and this is interesting, a very early use of the then new XL connector. This was before it was an XLR connector. And that was new, and that was something that the broadcasters wanted. We tried to, at that price point, as you might imagine, that broadcasting was one of the places that we were trying to sell this in. But this was one of Shure's first microphones, or I should say products, that had an XLR connector on, or XL just then. Here's the user guide, installation and service manual. They had all kinds of installation hints in there for the Vagabond. And this kind of shows you, this is a ceiling view. You're looking down, here's your stage. You put your receiver over here. You put that receiving antenna all the way out so Mick Jagger can run out there, or Chuck Berry, whoever it was using it back then. And that would be your best setup. So you basically told the performers to stay within that loop that the receiving antenna made. Our first public technical article about this was in March of 1954. An offer I will make to you, by the way, is I have this as a PDF. Tomorrow, if you want to send me an email at Shure asking for this, if you want it, I can give you a PDF copy of this. My email at Shure is Pettersen_Michael@Shure.com. If you can't remember that, I think you can just send it to info@Shure.com and say, send it to Michael the Historian. But it's about a 7 or 8 page article, all about the wireless microphone that we're making. And notice here, sub-miniature transmitter and self-contained antenna induction system does not require FCC approval. Well, it turns out the FCC didn't agree with that. Here's a section from that article I just mentioned. I just said on the side, some things never change. It talked about if we had done a high power system, it would require a federal license that would greatly restrict or even prohibit its use in the very applications which we wish to reach, public address, work, theater. Furthermore, these frequency assignments which might be obtained are available on a non-exclusive basis and will be subject to greater and greater interference as time goes on. That could have been written today, that sentence right there. Some things never change, particularly with the FCC. Here's a guarantee. Notice you got all of 90 days. We weren't too certain that this was going to work out very well. And of course, the problem was the vacuum tubes inside the receiver weren't a problem because the receiver didn't get jarred around a lot. But you've got something like a handheld transmitter, and those miniature, sub-miniature vacuum tubes inside of the transmitter did give us problems. And so we only sold this from 1963 to 1953, excuse me, to around 1960. That's about when I think it was discontinued, even though I've never been able to find a discontinuation notice, but it just kind of disappeared after that. Mr. Frank Sinatra. I'm going to tell you a story about Sinatra in the SM58 part. But there's an unconfirmed story that there was a Vagabond system used in Las Vegas, and he threw it against the wall because it didn't operate properly. Now, I've never been able to find any documentation that that's true, but having personally witnessed him throwing a Shure SM59, which I'll tell you about as we get into the 58, I think that the Vagabond story could indeed be true. So around 1960 or so, we discontinue it. Allegedly, Mr. Shure stated that when we can offer a wireless microphone system that is as reliable as a wireless microphone, we will re-enter the business. Well, it took us about 28 years. In 1988, we got back into the wireless mic business. And it was actually, here it was, the Shure wireless system, late 80s. And it was a joint development between Shure and Telex. Telex built the receiver, and Shure built the transmitters. So from the next 32 years, from 1988 to now, we've done pretty well, we think. And right now, we've got the Shure Accent digital system. This is not an advertisement. We believe it to be pretty much probably the most advanced wireless system out there right now, and debuted nearly 7 decades now after the Vagabond 88 was debuted. So this is a bit of our history that a lot of people don't know. We were about 4 or 5 years before Sennheiser brought out their first wireless microphone system. So that's the end of this one. And what I will do is escape and see if we can open it up to questions. So John, you want to see if there's any questions or comments? Hey, Yuri.
Hi, Mike. Michael. I don't have.
Any questions, John, here?
No, no questions.
Not any?
Anybody want to unmute themselves or raise your hand?
If anybody has one of those receivers, by the way, please contact me. We've only got one. Well, if there aren't any, John, I'll let you tell me. If you want me to go on to the 58 history, we can do that now. Now I've got Yuri looking over my shoulder as far as the 58 history. So if he corrects me, I will take his word for it.
Okay.
Well, I guess one question, Mike. What was the fidelity of this Vagabond like?
I've never heard it, Bob. We've never fired them up. You know, I'm just worried. As the historian and archivist, you know, you're a little bit into that Antiques Roadshow thing, right? If you go in and you repair them so they work, you're going to have to replace capacitors and so forth, and therefore it's not original anymore. So I've never heard one. You know, and there's no, as far as I know, no recordings of it. One of those things we'll probably just have to take. You know, I don't know. I would guess probably maybe okay, if that means anything, but we've never fired one up.
I'd just like to ask a question there. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Steve.
Do you know what kind of modulation was used? Was it AM or FM, or do you know anything about that?
I don't. But Steve, you send me a note tomorrow, and I'll send you the paper, the white paper. That'll tell you all about it.
That'd be good. Yeah, just out of curiosity.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was FM, but I'm not certain. The white paper, I will admit, is a little bit beyond my pay grade to understand. But if you send me a note to remind me tomorrow, I'll send it to you, because that's the best documentation I've got. We don't have a schematic, unfortunately, for the transmitter. We do have a schematic for the receiver. You know, so if you want that, I know you'll be able to figure it out just by looking at it. But it's interesting. But did operate at 2 megahertz. Yeah, well, did operate at 2 megahertz, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, higher than I would have thought at that time.
Yep. Good to see you, Steve.
Okay.
Anybody else? John, you want me to go on?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so let's go on to the SM58 history. And let's see. We okay? Got it? All right. So 54 years of the SM58. This is kind of interesting. I actually learned a lot doing this. And by the way, for some of you who have seen me present before, some of the early aspects of it, the Unidyne 1 and the Unidyne 2 history is going to be a repeat. So bear with me because not everyone has seen that, but we'll fly through some of that. So here it is, September 1966, where we introduced the SM58. By the way, it does not stand for Shure microphone, stands for studio microphone. And we'll talk a little bit later about why we thought it was a studio microphone. But it employed the Unidyne 3 mic element that debuted in 1959. And the SM58 is really the grandchild of the Unidyne 1 and the child of the Unidyne 2. So let's go back in history a little bit and look at some of its predecessors. 1939, Unidyne 1, model 55, which was the world's first unidirectional moving coil dynamic microphone with a single capsule. That was the big deal. And who invented that thing when he was only 24 years old? I know when I was 24 years old, I was not inventing something like that. And here he is, Benjamin B. Baumschweiger. He was born Benjamin, Benjamin Bauer is what he changed his name to, born Benjamin Baumschweiger. And he was the inventor of the Uniphase acoustical network. This is him in 1945. An amazing, amazing man. I think by the time he passed away in 79, he had over 100 patents to his name. In 2014, IEEE recognized the Unidyne microphone as a key invention of the 20th century, and they presented us this milestone award. Here it is. We got that on January 31st, 2014. That is on display in Shure headquarters, which of course is now closed to all visitors because of the COVID thing. This is milestone number 137. Over the 50 years of the milestone program, they've only awarded about, I think they just went over 200 now. But these milestones recognize inventions and ideas and actions and projects that had a worldwide impact on the field of electrical engineering. Other milestone awards, they gave work to Tesla, the creation of the internet, breaking of the Enigma code, the Apollo 11 moon landing. Those all have received milestone awards, and the Unidyne microphone. So we were quite proud to get this. Here's Ben Bauer's lab notebook, November 19th, 1937. This is the first day where he wrote a description of the Uniphase acoustical network concept. This single page basically changed microphone design forever. These notebooks, side story, had been lost and had for 60 years they've just disappeared. We had all the notebooks of almost every other engineers, including Steve Jolstrom and Bill Bevan and a few other people on this call, but the Bauer notebooks were nowhere to be found. We have about 500 boxes in offsite storage up in Northbrook. And one day, about 4 years ago, the head of finance said, you know, Michael, would you go out there with Julie, who was our archivist, and see if we can get rid of some of these boxes? You know, and I said, well, you shouldn't throw any of these out before you look at them. So we pulled 10 boxes random off the shelf. They were labeled. They had labels like engineering, finance, no dates, anything else on it. The second box I opened up, it's got the Bauer notebooks in it. It was just astonishing. I literally leapt in the air. So since that, we've taken them out of offsite storage, have them under lock and key, and have scanned them all. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to go through and read the entire set of notebooks and make a documentation of each page. And when I got to this page, the hair on the back of my neck stood up because I recognized this network here as the Unidyne network or the Uniphase network. And I love Bauer's notebook. This following arrangement seems to offer possibilities. Yeah, that's an understatement for the ages. Excuse me, gentlemen, I'm going to take a drink of water here. This is going to be original, by the way, it's a single crystal cardioid element. That's, you thought it was going to be a crystal, and it was. And they did do a crystal version of this as well. Here's what the first operational Unidyne prototype looked like, 1937. Boy, is that crude, huh? And notice that the magnetic field was created by putting a horseshoe magnet on the bottom of it, just basically attaching it to the metal base at the bottom. We found that out by reading his notebooks. So we went from industrial design prototype, that's what it was going to look like originally, to the manufactured product in about 2 years. But what was the inspiration for the appearance of the Unidyne? Well, I like this next slide because there it is. That's what the Unidyne was based on. This is a 1937 Oldsmobile Coupe 6. It has the same number of horizontal slats and the same division down the middle of it. And is it an inspiration or a coincidence? I think it was probably a little bit of both. Interestingly enough, Mr. Shure was a loyal Olds customer, so he may have had one of these cars and one day looked at the front of it and said, yeah, I think we'll make our microphones look like that. Here's the industrial designer who created it. His name is Wesley Scher. There he is sitting in. This is a photograph from 1938. And Wes actually worked for Shure as a contractor. He was not a Shure employee. He designed logos, he designed packaging, letterheads, and so forth. And he designed the Unidyne as far as how it looks. He later joined Play School Toys in Chicago and was their director of design for the rest of his career. And here is the very young Ben Bauer with a spit curl, which I think is very good. So here's the developer of the insides, here's the designer of the outsides, and there's Mr. Shure, the founder. 1939, we introduced the Unidyne to the world. It was priced at $45. That would be $835 today. But let me, a little side story about this. I know this is going off topic a little bit, but you see this here, Rocket 50. That is our first ribbon dynamic microphone, but we didn't call it a ribbon. We called it a moving conductor. Never quite figured out why we did that, except maybe that ribbons had a reputation of being fragile. But it was only about 2 years ago that I realized that we didn't have a Model 50 in the archive. And so I put the word out to the vintage microphone collectors I know around the country. And one of them, my friend Tom Ellis down in Dallas, said, you know, I've got two. I'm going to send you one for your archives because you guys have been so nice to me over the years. So I got this, and of course I only knew it as a moving conductor, so I thought it was going to be a moving coil. And I remember I got it and was excited, and I took off the grill, and there's a ribbon microphone staring me in my face, and I did my best imitation of Homer Simpson. I just stood there and went, what the heck is this? Well, it turned out it was indeed our first ribbon microphone, even though prior to taking that thing apart, I thought our first ribbon microphone was in the early 1950s, but nope, it goes all the way back to the 1930s. Again, another Ben Bauer design, and it was our first ribbon. Here's the patent from 1941, probably the most important patent in the Shure history. There's that same diagram that I saw in his notebook. You can see there is his name, Ben Baumsweiger. He had not changed it to Bauer. He changed it to Bauer in the summer of 41. And the story is, in the 41s, Shure started to get military contracts because the war was coming. And when you had someone that worked for you that had a very German sounding name, the US government was suspicious. And so Mr. Shure said to Ben, would you consider changing your name? And he did. Took the BAU and the ER and got rid of the middle part and changed his name to Bauer. He has two sons now. They're in their 80s, and one has Bauer, and the other one went back to Baumsweiger. So to see now, 12 years later, 1951, we bring out the Unidyne 2. It's basically a smaller version of the Unidyne 1. It's about 66% the size of the Unidyne. And the reason we brought it out was the Unidyne 1 was considered too large for television, which was a new medium back then, and television wanted the smaller one, so we bring out the 55S for small. Print ad from 1952, the microphone that needs no name. In those 12 years, that appearance of the microphone became so well known that we ran an ad that didn't even have the Shure name in it. I just noticed it just says the microphone that needs no name, and that's the entire ad there, and the name Shure is never mentioned in it. So in the 40s and the 50s, the Unidyne 1 and the Unidyne 2 were very popular mics for sound, live sound. Elvis, of course, was often photographed with the Unidyne 1 and the Unidyne 2. To this day, some people still call it the Elvis microphone. Frank Sinatra, we get to at the end, often used it when he was with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra in the 40s. Here he is with the Unidyne 2 a little bit later in his career. And of course, then we have all the crazy people that tattoo themselves with the Unidyne. If you want to amuse yourself, just go on a Google images, and just type in microphone tattoo. You don't have to put Shure in, you don't have to put Unidyne in, microphone tattoo, and you find page after page after page of people's bodies tattooed with that microphone. As I noticed here in the note, so one guy came up to me at an AES show in California, it was, and he had the microphone, the image on his right shoulder or his right upper arm. On his left arm was the polar pattern, and on his chest was the frequency response. You know, I worked at a company for 44 years, but believe me, I wouldn't do that. So finally, here we go. Unidyne 3 debuts in 1945. We introduced it as the world's smallest cardioid dynamic microphone. Again, now it's an end fire. Remember, the Unidyne 1 and the Unidyne 2 were side fires, so here's an end fire. Priced about $50. And notice Amphenol connector. We were not using the XLR connector yet on the Unidyne. Who developed it? Ernie Seeler, a mentor to Yuri and to many of us. And he was the creator of the Unidyne 3. He was born in Cuba. His father was German, his mother was American. He was trained in Germany. He lived in, he joined us in 1953 and retired in 97. Interestingly enough, he trained under Ben Bauer, who also lived in Cuba as a youth. As a matter of fact, I did some calculations that from let me think about this. It was around 1925 to 1930, Ben Bauer and Ernie Seeler were both living in Havana. I don't know if they knew each other, but I think that's an interesting little thing. But the Unidyne 3 was the first unidirectional end fire microphone from Shure, where the performer was saying into the end of it, not the side of it. And a key benefit of a really well-designed end fire cylindrical microphone, which is symmetrical about its axis, is the uniformity of the polar pattern. This basically provides you improved gain before feedback. So with the Unidyne 3, sound systems could be louder, outdoor concerts could be used. This led to stadium concerts and outdoor events like Woodstock, where all the microphones are Unidyne 3 model 565s, by the way. And literally, we were in the right place at the right time as rock and roll developed and got louder, and we had a microphone that could be used on stage and be used in louder situations. We turned up louder without feeding back. And ironically, Ernie really disliked rock music. He wanted the frequency response of the Unidyne 3 to be flat, and he was disappointed with this rising presence peak, according to what I've heard. In fact, he considered a bit of a flaw in the design, but that rising presence peak here is really the sound of Unidyne 3 microphones. And I think without that presence peak, it wouldn't be as popular as has been for the last 4 and 5 decades. Now here's someone that doesn't get a lot of credit. His name is Bob Carr. Bob Carr worked as a professional products marketing manager at Shure in the 60s and 70s. In fact, Bob was there when I came to work at Shure, and I learned a great deal from him, as well as other people on this. I will call out Bill Bevan, and I'll call up Yuri Schulman and Steve Jolstrom, all people I learned a great deal from. But Bob Carr was one of my first mentors there, and he decided that Shure needed to make a line of microphones for radio and television and film studios, because at the time, AKG and Electro Voice and RCA were dominant. We wanted to capture some of that market. So our studio microphone line was going to be based on existing mics like the Unidyne 3, but have some new features. We would have a dark, non-reflective finish so that studio lights wouldn't shine off the mics. There would be a 3-pin male XLR connector, not the Amphenol, because broadcasters like the XLR. It'd be factory wired as balanced low impedance, because no broadcaster is going to use high impedance or unbalanced. And there would be no on-off switch, or if there was a switch, it'd be hidden by the plate, so someone on camera would turn the microphone off accidentally. So in 1964, under Bob's direction, we debuted 5 microphones: the SM5, SM33, SM50, SM56, and SM76. I will show you something here, which is kind of clever. Here is Bob, but look at this weird little rectangular square microphone here. That is a Shure SM3 ribbon microphone, never introduced. It was designed to go up against RCA. We made a few of them, I would guess maybe less than 50, probably maybe 5 or 10. There's a few of them out in the field. We have several of them in the archive, but it never came out. So there's one of the very first Shure SM microphones. And here is an SM5, which is one of our popular boom microphones. And basically there's a Unidyne 3 element inside their variation on it. 1964, the Unidyne 3 SM56 arrives. This preceded the SM57. It had a price of $91. Non-reflective gray finish, XLR connector, front plate. This front plate covered a switch. And that switch gave you 3 positions: high impedance, off, and low impedance. This mic turned out to be very, very popular in Las Vegas, but for not the reason you would think about. They had a problem with microphones being stolen. And so they would put Loctite on the threads in here, and they would apply them to the mic stand threads, and therefore, if you're going to try to steal that microphone, you had to steal the stand along with that microphone. So that's how, I mean, they liked the sound of it as well, but that little feature made it very popular in Las Vegas, pit orchestras. August 12th, 1965, here's the Beatles. Now, the SM microphones were not really well established yet, but they're doing a tour, and they're using the Model 545. This is them performing in Comiskey Park in Chicago. Look real closely. I love this. Here you get the foam windscreen held on by a rubber band, the biggest band in the world, and we're holding the windscreen on with rubber bands. There was this is a quick disconnect. This allowed you to remove the microphone from the stand quickly if you wanted. It also had a little bit of shock mounting in there. There's an interesting story about these exact Beatle mics. When the Beatles went on tour, Shure loaned the Beatles management, I think it was probably 12, maybe 15 of these microphones. And the deal was, when the tour was over, they were going to return those microphones to Shure, and Shure was going to auction off those microphones for charity. So the tour ends. Mics don't come back. Mics don't come back. Mics don't come back. Finally, someone from our PR department calls up Beatles management and says, "Where are those microphones you promised to send back?" And they say, "Oh, we sent them back. We sent them back about 2 weeks after the tour was ended." "How did you mark them?" "Well, we didn't mark them. We put them into a cardboard box and sent them back to your service department." Well, it turned out the service department did get the microphones, didn't know who they were from, didn't know what to do with them, and so they scrapped them all for parts. Don't we wish we had those microphones today? 1965, the SM57 is introduced. It looks just like the 56, except it doesn't have the stand mount built onto it. $63. This is the forerunner of the SM58. And in 1966, the White House Communications Agency first deployed the 57 for the President of the United States. And that has been the microphone for the President of the United States from Johnson all the way through the current administration. Sometimes there's been 4, sometimes there's been 3, sometimes there's been 2. Now there's 1 on the end of a long gooseneck suspended in a Shure A55M shock mount. And it's been there for 54 years. There's never had a failure. But as I like to say, there's been lots of lies and misstatements captured through those microphones over the decades. In 1966, finally, we get over to the SM58, introduced in 1966, $81. First year sales, 145 units. That was it. Very, very disappointing. As a matter of fact, we didn't hit 1,000 units in sales until 1971. And even then, that was very disappointing. Not anywhere near the amount of microphones that Bob Carr thought we would sell. But at the same time, we're starting to have some popularity. The first Shure microphones that became very popular for rock were not the SM58, they were the SM56. In fact, the Monterey Pop Festival, which is in June 1967, featured all Shure SM57s as the frontline microphones and the backline microphones. McCune Sound out of San Francisco supplied all the PA system, and sound engineer Abe Jacobs, who later went on to become a big sound designer in New York for theater, specified all the gear. So the 56 with an A2WS windscreen was used on screen. Performers was Jimi Hendrix, obviously shown here, Joplin, The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Byrds, Mamas and the Papas, everybody that was hot at the time were using these mics. This SM56 here that I'm shown was used at the Monterey Pop Festival and other festivals, and it's owned by the Shure Archive. I was on eBay, it was about 2 years ago, I guess it was, and I saw this really beat up 56 on there, and I saw this red label, which I recognized immediately as a Harry McCune label, and was engraved as number 43. It's engraved right down here, microphone 43. I contacted McCune Sound. They're still in business. One of the old timers said, "Yeah, we bought about 50 of these microphones and used them for all the festivals in the 60s. So I immediately bought it. And here is Jimi Hendrix with a McCune SM56 with that red label. So we know this was used on stage with Hendrix when he was at the Monterey Pop Festival. We don't know which microphone it was. Could have been on the drums, could have been on the amplifiers, could have been a vocal mic, but no matter what, it was definitely there. And if you ever can come to the Shure Archives, once we open up again, you will see that microphone. That was a big score for me off of eBay. So in 1970, SM58's not doing well. And so to boost its anemic sales, we did a print ad campaign. This was in DB magazine. Some of you may remember that. But if you read the copy, it's all about the broadcasting market. We're trying to sell this to the wrong market. We're trying to sell it to broadcasters, and broadcasters simply aren't very interested in this. So believe it or not, in the late 60s, the 56 and the 57 and the 58 were seriously considered for discontinuation because none of the models were selling even close to what the forecast numbers were. Guy working at Shure at the time, Roger Ponto, who was the national sales manager, suggested that we might try promoting the 58 to sound engineers in Las Vegas showrooms. Maybe it would be a good microphone for live sound. Roger was correct, it was. So now, I just like Cleese in this silly walk. I'm just going to answer some commonly answered 58 questions. Someone said, oh, great number, SM58. Man, that was a really great. Why did you come up with that? Well, it was a numerical sequence. We had the model 55 and 39, the model 55S and 51, SM56 and 64, SM57, SM58. Simple as that. There was an SM59 and an SM60 and an SM61 and a 62 and a 63. So it goes on. By the way, SM58 now is a registered trademark of Shure Incorporated. So the patents have long expired, but we still have that as a trademark. Origin of the Unidyne name. I only found this out recently, by the way. In 1924, Unidyne described a newly developed AM radio circuit that was developed in Great Britain. Now, Mr. Shure was a very serious AM radio hobbyist, and so I know that he knew about the circuit and probably its name. But a trademark was never issued for Unidyne as an AM radio term. It was just kind of a generic term that someone made up. So I think he filed that away for future use. And in 1939, when we were working on, or when we introduced our new single element moving coil dynamic microphone, the 55, we put the term Unidyne on it. And Unidyne can mean, of course, a single mic element, plus it can mean a unidirectional pattern. And dyne could mean a dynamic microphone element, and of course, a unit of force used in acoustics. So it all worked well to describe that microphone. In July 1960, Shure got a trademark for the term Unidyne, but the original use of it was for a AM radio circuit. Yes, the 58 and the 57 use the same element. It's a Unidyne 3. The fundamental difference between the two is the protective grill and the grill fastening method. So the 58, of course, has the metal ball grill that threads to a closing ring, and the 57 has a rotating plastic grill secured by a C-shaped clip. Though the geometry of each grill slightly alters the high frequency response, and you can see those differences in the printed graphs in the user guides. The Unidyne 3 is also used in the 545 and the model 565. By the way, the model 565 is having another renaissance because of the movie about Freddie Mercury, the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. And of course, he used a 565 throughout his career. And also a Unidyne 3 variation, not exactly the same, but a variation is inside the SM7B. That microphone now is wildly popular. You cannot believe how many, we can't build them fast enough. And even though it was introduced in, excuse me, in 1973 as the SM7, the year 2020 will be probably the largest sales year ever of the SM7. It's just, again, we can't make them quick enough. The SM58 was never patented. However, the Unidyne 3 mic element was indeed patented. And as I mentioned before, it was a utility patent that covered all the models that used the Unidyne 3 element. But there was a design patent on the 545 that also applies to the SM57. So let's take a look at those patents. Here's the utility patent about the Unidyne 3 and how it operates. And of course, Charles Ernest Sealer is the inventor. Here's that same network that we saw all the way back in 1937 in Bauer's lab notebook. And here's the design patent. Bob Deshaw did a lot of great designing for this. This is probably his most popular design ever. Again, he didn't work for us. He was an outside designer, but here it is, simply called microphone, and that's the design patent, and that is a 545 or an SM57, depending upon how you paint the handle. The SM58 really has only one moving part. Yeah, I know that the shock mount moves as well, but primarily the moving part is the diaphragm and the copper wire on the diaphragm. Length of the voice coil is about 40 feet, and the plastic diaphragm is mylar. Total weight of that voice coil and diaphragm assembly is about 0.2 grams. And so basically 15 diaphragm assemblies equals the weight of 1 US penny approximately. Gives you an idea how lightweight they are. Can a singer damage the SM58 with excessive sound pressure level? Nah, we don't think so. You know, an SM58, like the maximum length of travel is less than 1/1000th of an inch. And so if the diaphragm moves too far, it would basically be stopped by that magnetic pole piece. So when people hear distortion from their SM58, pretty much what they're probably doing is clipping the input of the mixer and not damaging or clipping the microphone. Some other trivia. The original 58 handle was two-toned. It's now one tone, but it used to be a dark gray background with some darker gray flecks on it. As we mentioned before, it was intended for radio and television film studios. That was why it was SM, studio microphone. The original 58 handle had a little step down near the XLR where the diameter suddenly decreased in size. Never knew why that was there. And maybe afterwards, maybe Bill or Yuri does, but that was a little design feature that we got rid of. The original 58 was a selectable dual low impedance, not low and high impedance, but dual low impedance, 50 ohms and 150 ohms. The air trapped within the 58 handle is actually a key part of the vibration isolation mechanism. And the 58 grill designed to dent when it drops, like a crumple zone on a body, a car body. And by the way, you can use a rounded end of a wooden file handle to really tap those out and make them look good again. 58's been used aboard this International Space Station. And we did have a 58 with a switch in the 60s. It's called the PE50SP, Super Pro it stood for. So here's my Sinatra story. And let me take a drink of water before I tell it to you. So I started in 76, and in 77, I was in sales for the first 5 years. I was not a good salesperson, by the way. And we came up with the SM59, and there it is, SM59, I think primarily designed by a guy named Terry Locke. Yuri can correct me on that later. And my boss at the time, Roger Ponto, took me to Las Vegas for my first trip out. And he said, I got an assignment for you, Michael. I want you to take the 59 over to Caesar's Palace. Sinatra is rehearsing over there this afternoon. And go to Dave Rogers. He's a sound man I had met Dave before. He's a sound man for Caesar's. And Dave will get Sinatra's sound man to have him use it at a rehearsal. Oh, great. Sure, boss. Why not? So I go over to Caesar's Palace with an SM59 in hand and meet Dave Rogers in the sound booth. Sound booth's probably about 100 feet away from the front of the stage. And hand him the SM59. And Dave says, oh, great. I'll take it down on stage. So he goes out on stage. He says, you stay here. He goes down on the stage, starts talking to Sinatra's sound man, showing him the microphone and so forth. I'm looking at this from about 100 feet. Wait, I see a relatively animated conversation going on, almost kind of like this is not going well. But eventually Sinatra's sound man shrugs his shoulders, goes over, takes the SM58 off the stand and plugs in the SM59, and everything's fine. Dave Rogers comes back to the sound booth and said, hey, he's going to try it. Everything's great. About 5 minutes later, Sinatra comes out for the rehearsal, says hi to the band in a really good mood, and then his mood suddenly darkens when he turns and he doesn't see the microphone that he's used to on the stand. And he says very plainly, and I will clean this up for our audience, where's my freaking SM58? And the sound man over the side says, Frank, this is a new microphone from Shure. He wants you to try it out. Would you mind? All right. So he counts the band off, and the first tune he does is called Come Fly With Me, which we will find out what he did pretty soon. Because he sang about 8 bars and takes the 59 off the stand and all his might throws it to the left. And it bounces along the stage and hits the wall. And basically he yells at his sound man, get me my microphone. And so the sound man runs over, picks up the 59, unplugs it, plugs in the 58, puts it on the stand. Sinatra's happy now. Rehearsal goes on. And the Sinatra sound man takes the 59, puts it into his pocket, comes up to me in the sound booth 100 feet away where I'm like shaking in fear, hands me the microphone, the 59, and it says to me very softly, he didn't like it. And so I basically took out of there as fast as I could, thinking all the time, what am I going to tell my boss? So that was my one and only one interface with Mr. Sinatra. And therefore I put under this thing, tell that kid from Shure not to come back. So there you go. There's my Frank Sinatra story. Talk about abuse, rock and roll abuse. Of course, we have Roger Daltrey. Now, Roger Daltrey has used this microphone since 1966, he claims. And of course, one of his famous things is he likes to twirl it around. And so I've got Mr. Daltrey here talking about the SM58. Now, we tried this out ahead of time, and we hope that the video and the audio are going to run properly. Even if the video doesn't run, guys, I'm going to let the audio come up because it's a great story. And let's see if we can hear Mr. Daltrey tell his story about the SM58.
Well, I've found this microphone to be absolutely remarkable, and no one's more abusive to a microphone than I am. Not only with the bad vocals, but and the bum notes, but you know, generally misuse of a mic completely. Like I remember I did a thing for Shure, and to demonstrate how good this mic was, I slammed it at the floor deliberately, bang, like that, and then picked it up and did the rest of the interview with the crowd with the microphone. It didn't break it, didn't change the sound of it. It was extraordinary. Well, the swinging of the microphone, I can't really remember when it started. I think it kind of started in 1967, out of boredom. During we used to do very long, kind of guitarists have lots of things to play with when the band goes into a jam, and I used to just get totally bored, and so I just used to play with it, and I thought, well, this is interesting, and I could do more and more things with it. And in those days when I had my eyesight, I could take a cigarette out of someone's mouth from about 20 feet away. I got that good with it. Very kindly, Shure, I said to Shure, do you mind if we keep the microphones after every show and I donate them to charities? Because singers have very little they can give to auctions and things where people are trying to raise money for foundations. And kindly Shure said, yep, you can have every one. And since then, they're now fetching really good money for lots of good causes all around the world. So that's really brilliant, and I thank them for that.
So just a great story by Roger. Now, I was going to let me advance here. Let's see if it will. Come on. Okay, come on.
Well,
sorry, guys.
I've found this.
I'm trying to get to the next screen. I can't quite click on it there. There we go. This is October 2008. This is from the Shure archive, and this is a letter from Rose Shure, who of course took over when Mr. Shure died in 1995, to a letter to Roger Daltrey. We've taken out Mr. Daltrey's address there. Sorry about that. But it just says, the image of swinging your microphone by its cable into the air is engraved in the history of rock. In your role as the front man for The Who, you provided enormous visibility for our model SM58 and inspired countless musicians to follow in your path. And Roger was very touched when he got this nice letter from Rose Shure. So in 2017, we actually did some custom 58s. We partnered with The Who and Sir Paul McCartney. And we auctioned off 600 limited edition SM58s with custom graphics. You can see the custom graphics here. These were designed by The Who's people, if you will, and by McCartney. And all the proceeds for the auctions went to charitable foundations for the McCartney's Meat Free Monday and The Who's Teen Cancer America. And these are a commemorative purchase and donation honoring the decades of music these artists have given to us. There are also some very special ones that serials number 1 through 10 were hand signed with an autograph in either gold or silver ink. And I remember those went for several $1,000s each. So there's Daltrey's mic, by the way. It is the one SM58 Daltrey mic that we have in the archive. It was sent back to us by Daltrey because it was the only one that failed, and he wanted to know why. So we basically started by x-raying the cable, and sure enough, the cable crimp right there was too sharp, and the actual conductors broke. We tested the microphone worked fine. So 54 years after its debut, it continues to be a favorite with engineers, performers, even some broadcasters, even though it never was very successful in recording studios. And my question to everybody there is, do you remember your first SM58? And I do. It's from the early 70s, and I still have